So thank you all so much for joining us this afternoon. This is the final session in our 2025 Intersectional Webinar Series. My name is Danielle Hubley, and I manage Advocacy and Education at the Partnership for Strong Communities. It's been an incredible honor to host this series where we're uplifting conversations with advocates and leaders in other sectors to talk about the impact that a lack of safe, affordable housing has on the work that they're doing. Some quick housekeeping before we dive into today's conversation. The session is being recorded and will be published to the Partnership's YouTube channel within the next week. We'll drop a link in the chat to the full series recording, so you can check out other conversations from this series and also today's conversation. If you're not here with us live, the recording will be published there for you to view. If you have any questions throughout today's conversation, please plan to use the chat box at the bottom right-hand side of your screen to add to today's conversation. The hour always goes so much faster than we expect it to, so we'll get to as many questions as we can, but I'll make sure our presenters share their contact information in the chat as well, so if you want to follow up with them beyond today's conversation or have further questions for them, you can reach them. Moving on to my next slide. If you're looking for more affordable housing policy discussions, you should register for our annual Affordable Housing Conference. It's taking place November 17th and 18th, so coming up quick next month. But if you find yourself saying, you know, Danielle, I've enjoyed and learned so much from this webinar series, but what I would really love is even more housing policy learning opportunities, then the conference is 1000% the place for you. It's free, fully virtual. So we do hope to see you there. There's going to be so many other incredible conversations going on, expanding on today's conversation, but also in a wide swath of housing conversations. So another great place to plug in if you're not done learning with us. So with that, let me dive in a little bit to talk about the partnership and why we're hosting this series. The Partnership for Strong Communities promotes equitable change in Connecticut housing policy by coordinating advocacy, advancing research, and uniting diverse partners. We carry out our mission through our partnerships. We are committed to policies and practices that reduce disparities in housing and within our organization. We ground our work in facts and data to dispel myths, challenge stereotypes, and fill gaps in knowledge to drive change. And we prioritize housing solutions that will be affordable and sustainable long-term, focusing on the full spectrum of housing needs and experiences now and for generations to come. Our vision is that everyone in Connecticut has a safe, stable home that is affordable to them in an equitable community of their choice. And we operate under the perspective that housing is a human right and should be treated as such in policymaking decisions. So how do we actualize our vision? Well, we know that a healthy housing system necessitates a comprehensive approach intertwining housing affordability, housing creation, choice, and stability. People need to afford their homes while meeting their other basic needs. We need more physical homes, period. We need all different kinds of homes for people to choose from in all communities across the state. And most importantly, people should have the right to safe, stable homes and be supported from experiences of housing instability, evictions, and homelessness. So this here is how we weave a housing system that prioritizes the needs of our residents and that supports strong families and strong communities. Today's conversation is predominantly going to focus around the priorities, I think, of affordability and stability that you see here, but certainly has implications across all four of these priority areas. So we'll dive in a little bit more on the affordability and stability piece, but obviously there's a lot to dive into at this intersection across all four of these areas. So what do I mean when I say something is intersectional? Intersectionality, term coined by Kimberly Crenshaw to describe the double bind of simultaneous racial and gender prejudice, can also be more broadly defined as a framework for conceptualizing a person, a group of people, or a social problem as affected by a number of influences. It takes into account people's overlapping identities and experiences in order to understand the complexities that they may face. In 2024, Connecticut's Students Experiencing Homelessness Dashboard shows that there were over 5,100 students in Connecticut who experienced homelessness during the 2024 school year. We know that housing instability makes it harder for children to learn and can be associated with more behavioral challenges for younger children, and oftentimes is associated with lower scores on standardized test results for older children. I wanted to pull on a direct quote from a Shelter Force article that was published last year, where they say, stable, healthy, decent, affordable housing sets kids up for learning and allows schools to be able to focus on what they do best. And strong, supported schools with the resources that they need can be anchors for communities both during the school day and outside of it. Um, Ultimately, the bottom line is that when we're ensuring stability and affordability for all households, everyone benefits. Protecting our lowest income renters and homeowners builds a stronger baseline for the safety and stability of all residents. When households have a stable home, they're better able to meet other important basic needs like food, childcare, and healthcare, and are more likely to invest in their community events, services, and local businesses, creating healthier communities and oftentimes more local active economies. So before I pass off the conversation to today's presenters, I wanted to give a few minutes to one of the partnership's research associates from our 2025 cohort this year, Kalima, who I'll have her share just a few key takeaways from her recently and well-timed published paper on the impact of housing instability on the educational success of teens and young adults of color in Connecticut. So I'll pass it off to Kalima to jump in.
Thank you so much, Danielle. Yes, I have always been so passionate about uncovering the intersectional issues of that the lack of affordable housing cost young folks, particularly young folks of color. And one of the key findings in my research was that the state of Connecticut has a severe lack of comprehensive data on college students who are facing housing instability, poverty, food insecurity. There were a few studies done by the Hope Center, one conducted in 2020 and another one conducted, I think, in 2023, and only one college in the entire state from Connecticut participated in this study. And so a lot of students are facing issues that are just being swept under the rug that the state is not even in tune with. And that puts them at risk of so many things: depression, poor health, having to drop out of school to support their families, just living on the street, bouncing from house to house. Another key finding from my research was that from the years 2019 to 2023, about 19% of young people faced poverty, and 20 from the African American or Black community, and 22% from the Hispanic or Latino community, in comparison to only 8% of white youth. And I mean, this is a huge discrepancy. And so we have to look at, well, why is this happening? What are the underlying issues? Ultimately, what I found to be really inspiring in my research was the chance to speak with educators. Teachers want to help, but they don't necessarily have the resources. And they are, at the very least, aware that their students are struggling. And they often want to intervene, but they just need more support from their school administrators as to how to do it. And a key quote is from a middle school student from, I'm sorry, a middle school teacher from Hartford, was that we constantly push students academically to take all of these classes, to get A's, to get into college. If we want to push kids academically, we must find ways to make housing more affordable for our families. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kalima. And I know we were only able to have her on for a quick minute here with us today, but she'll also be presenting at the Affordable Housing Conference in November. So just another quick plug if you want to come hear her speak a little bit more about some of her research, along some other incredible research our associates and partners have been engaged in. That's my final plug for the conference today. All right, without any further ado, let's dive into today's conversation. I'm going to pass it off to Barbara to introduce herself, and I'll pull your slides up and we'll get started.
Thank you very much. It's great to be with everyone this afternoon. My name is Barbara Duffield. I am the Executive Director of SchoolHouse Connection. SchoolHouse Connection, for those of you for whom this is the first time you're learning about us, we are a national organization working to overcome homelessness through early care and education. So We are right at that intersection of housing and education. We work the entire continuum of on the entire continuum of child development. So we say prenatal through post-secondary. We do policy advocacy at the state level, also at the federal level. Most of our team is engaged in what we call practical assistance, really hands-on help for communities to implement laws and support children, youth, and families who are homeless. And last but not least, we have a youth leadership and scholarship program where we are directly supporting young people to and through higher education. So really great to hear Kalima's focus on higher education. Most of my focus today is going to be on K-12, but again, this all applies for the entire learning. So next slide has a little bit more information about Schoolhouse Connection. You can see our website to learn more about that. Really, so by way of starting out my portion of this on the next slide, just the way that we think about this intersection of housing and education, they are both necessary for stability and success in life. We know that lack of safe, stable, affordable housing negatively impacts educational outcomes. So when you compare chronic absence, for example, or high school graduation of students who are experiencing homelessness to students who are housed but low income, you see a tremendous difference between 10 to 13%. So homelessness, the lack of housing, has an impact over and above poverty on educational attainment. At the same time, a high quality education is absolutely necessary to obtain and maintain housing. In fact, lack of a high school degree is the single greatest risk factor for continuing to experience homelessness as a young adult. And we know that education protects against unemployment. So these statistics here are from the Bureau of Labor Statistics and really show the correlation between increasing educational attainment and lower unemployment, just as one protective factor. So that's what we're coming in at this. It's a both and. It's not an either or, it's a both and. On the next slide, then really, again, I'm focusing more on K-12 here, just to think about the really critical role that public schools have. They exist in all communities. There may not be shelter, there may not be affordable housing, but there are public schools in all communities. There's also a federal right to a seat in the classroom for every child who's experiencing homelessness. There may not be a shelter bed, there may not be a home, but there's a seat in the classroom. And that really gives schools a very unique vantage point and a place to intersect all over the country in every community. Stacey will go into a little bit more detail about what that means, what that federal right actually means, and why it's so important. But just to say that educators have their eyes on children and youth day after day in a way that no other system really does. And they may be more trusted systems for families and young people than other systems. So that's really, again, just really emphasizing that unique role. There's so much good. I think the next part of my presentation, I'm going to go good news, bad news, good news, bad news. The good news is there are great partnerships all over the country, including in Connecticut, really bridging between early care and education providers and housing providers. Have to give a big shout out to Head Start on Housing, Connecticut's flagship initiative, really paving the way for housing vouchers directly to Head Start programs to prevent and solve homelessness. We worked this year, we did a great webinar with Chattanooga, with Hamilton County, where they've created special admissions vouchers, partnering with the schools. So the school McKinney-Vento liaisons are doing that intake, all sorts of wonderful collaborations, including the city as well. And then eviction prevention is another area where we're seeing really innovative, amazing practices where schools are able, as the front line, to help prevent homelessness from happening in the first place through eviction. So in Tulsa, they're looking at those records and seeing who's enrolled in Tulsa public schools, getting ahead of it that way. In Rochester, working with housing agencies, and then even some states like Washington State, where there's a state line item for housing community-based organizations who are partnering with schools. What all these examples have in common is it's a direct connection. They are integrating housing and education in a way to prevent and really solve homelessness. So that's the good news. Going to flip to some bad news now. Again, we work at the federal level, so I'm going to tell you some of the things, our top priorities, which have changed in the last couple of days from when we first started planning this webinar. So on the next slide, we're in a government shutdown. We're in a government shutdown and an impasse that is causing harm every day. It continues. For federal education programs, there's less of an immediate impact. Education funding at the federal level is forward funded. That means that schools right now have their funds, K-12 programs have their funds, and they are able to access those funds currently, including the Education for Homeless Children and Youth program. On the other hand, on the next slide, we see a growing concern for other federal programs in this shutdown for Head Start if there's still a shutdown on November 1st, we're looking at many programs being at risk of losing their funding. And in Connecticut, 395 seats, Head Start seats at risk of with the shutdown continuing. Same impacts on housing. Again, there's HUD is not reviewing or issuing new grants. There should be rental assistance at least through November. And I really want to emphasize the National Housing Law Project, the Know Your Rights resources for people who are living in HUD-supported housing during this time. And of course, we're all concerned about what's going to be happening with SNAP and WIC across the country as this continues. So very serious focus right now around the shutdown. Some positive news on the next slide, in terms of where we were before Congress basically stopped working, is, the intersection of education and housing. President Trump's budget called for eliminating the homeless education program and putting it into a block grant. With a lot of grassroots advocacy, we were able to get the program preserved in both the House and the Senate side. So I mentioned this just because I really want to put in a plug in for advocacy. If you think it doesn't matter right now, it does matter. And when Congress picks up again, we're going to be in a different place with the homeless education program because of the grassroots efforts. Flipping back to the negative, now on the next slide. This happened, again, before we were planning this webinar. On October 10th, the Trump administration fired nearly 500 employees at the U.S. Department of Education. This includes the staff who are working on the homeless education program. So this is our top policy priority right now, because it's just so important. There's litigation, there's bipartisan concern, but this is really what we're focused on, because on the next slide, it matters. It matters that there's federal oversight. States need to get questions, authoritative questions. Their ability to get those questions answered means that children and youth are in school and learning, clarify how to use funds. The data that we're looking at, all of that comes from the U.S. Department of Education. So we put a new resource out yesterday, but really want to just emphasize how important it is to really engage on some of these federal pieces that may seem far removed from day-to-day in communities, but actually have a big impact. Just to finish up, a couple resources to point you to in the next slide. A reminder thank you. A reminder that these protections are still in place. So everything Stacey's going to talk about, despite the federal instability, despite the federal chaos, these protections are in place, and they're as good as the people who are willing to implement them, share them, and stand up for them. So put in a plug there. Resources for you in the next couple slides. I don't want to take away additional times from my co-presenters, but just to say that you'll have these slides, you'll have these links. Now, the next slide, for example, shows you some data resources that we have. So I'm really grateful for your time and happy to answer questions.
Great, thank you. Folks, feel free to drop questions in the chat while we're moving along. I'm going to have Stacey jump in and introduce herself, and I'll pull your slides up. I believe we shared a note in the chat as well that we will share these slides alongside the recording. So all of the links that are available in there will be accessible to you alongside the recording from today's event.
Thank you, Danielle, and thank you, Barbara. I thank the partnership for pulling this group together. And I look forward to hearing the rest of the information from my co-presenters today. I'm going to sort of jump off from where Barbara started and talk about some of the intersection in terms of what it looks like a little bit in terms of some of the legal rights, and in terms of sort of lifting up 3 ways I think that we can look at this intersection between affordable housing and education. If you could go to the next slide. So I'm the Deputy Director at the Center for Children's Advocacy, where I also direct our Homeless Youth Advocacy Project. And we're a private nonprofit law firm. We are the largest children's civil rights law firm in New England. And we do policy advocacy across the state on behalf of low-income children and youth in all different arenas. And we also do individual legal representation as well as training and education. If you could go on to the next slide. So when I think about this intersection, I think about 3 distinct buckets. One is around preventing young people from becoming homeless. and ensuring that they have safe and healthy places to live. Another piece is around advocating for students' rights to be in school. Barbara laid out that we have federal laws protecting students, and we'll talk a little bit more about those. And then lastly, the importance of centering young people with lived expertise of homelessness in order to determine solutions. So if you could go on to the next slide, we'll jump right in. So when I talk about preventing youth from becoming homeless, I think about the young people who are exiting our state systems as one particularly vulnerable group, and the importance of ensuring that they're connected to safe and affordable housing. So who would that be? That's young people who are exiting our child welfare system, and aging out of that system. It's young people who are in our justice system and who may be re-entering back to school or into their housing after being in the justice system. And then young people and their experience in our mental health system. One thing we know in Connecticut is that about 22% of our youth, 18 to 24-year-olds who enter our homeless system have a past history of being in foster care. And so we know that both from our data, but also from data that is nationwide. And so it's not surprising to us that that's an area where we need to focus on partnership with our child welfare system and really understanding what the risk factors are, understanding what those trajectories look like. And this data that I've shared has really been on a self-report from young people. We could do a much better job of drilling down to get data from all of these systems, our mental health system, our justice system, and our child welfare system, to really have a clear idea of that connection. We have had a history in Connecticut of screening in our juvenile justice and other areas of our justice system for housing instability, and would like to think about how we do that across other systems. Connecticut does have an interagency council on homelessness, so this may be a place where we can look at some of this cross systems work. We also think about ensuring that families, of course, have access to safe and affordable housing. We see young people fall into housing when families can't afford their housing and end up separating, and young people are living either with friends and couch hopping, or have been split up from their families, or young people who are heads of households who are themselves unable to afford housing. And so ensuring that we take all of those policy actions to have a safe and affordable housing for families. And then there's this group of minors. We do have minors under the age of 18 who experience homelessness on their own. Sometimes that's because of family rejection or family conflict. Sometimes that's due to not being able to stay with family who can't afford their housing. I did share with Danielle a document that we have worked with a statewide group of folks to identify contacts and resources throughout the state for minors who are experiencing homelessness, and that'll be accessible to you. And we have had a few communities pilot a case conferencing process for minors who are on their own so that they can be directly connected to resources. If you could go, thank you. So thinking in particular about students' rights to be in school, I'm going to talk for a few moments about some of those rights at a very high level, and how you can utilize school to connect students to supports and resources. And then before we close out that discussion, I'll mention some of the gaps that we see. Next slide. So as Barbara mentioned, the federal McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act gives students experiencing homelessness, including minors, legal rights to make school choice decisions and to access resources in order to successfully continue uninterrupted in school. And the definition of a student experiencing homelessness is students who lack fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. And this includes young people and families and children who are doubled up due to a loss of housing, economic hardship, or a similar reason. Now, please note, this definition is much broader for those of you who are used to working in the HUD definition to access housing. The McKinney-Vento definition of homelessness is much broader. As Barbara said, there's a seat in the classroom for any students experiencing homelessness. While we might not have shelter or we might not have housing, this definition is quite broad by design so that we are ensuring that students are in school. Next slide, please. And in particular, there's a category of students who are called unaccompanied youth, which means they're a child or youth experiencing homelessness who's not in the physical custody of a parent or guardian. And this could be from some of the reasons I mentioned earlier. It could be because the family has lost their housing and they've split up. It could be because the young person was unsafe in their home and had to run away. It could be because they're a young person who's LGBTQ plus and are unsafe or rejected in their home. It could be for a myriad of reasons, but those young people have special legal rights to be able to direct their education. Next slide, please. I just wanted to again bring home and emphasize that the school definition of homelessness is much broader than the definition used to access housing. So if you look at these circles, you'll see there's several federal laws protecting students experiencing homelessness. Barbara talked about some earlier, but this sort of Venn diagram can show you how students can take advantage of laws for special education students. That's the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. They might be a student who's in HUD housing or shelter and maybe receiving services there. And then students' access to college is supported by, and access to secondary education is supported by McKinney-Vento and the College Cost Reduction Act. But again, you see that the McKinney-Vento circle on the other side of your slide is much bigger than the HUD homeless circle, because we want to emphasize that students it's a broader definition of those experiencing homelessness. Next slide, please. So what do these students have the right to? Here are some of the enumerated rights under the federal law. Basically, the right to immediate enrollment in the student's school of choice, where they were going before they lost their housing or where they're currently staying. And school districts and the student may disagree about whether or not the student is homeless. And then there's a process for just resolving that dispute. But the student must be enrolled and attending while the dispute is taking place and any appeals to those decisions. Importantly, the right to adequate and appropriate transportation, the right to have fees and fines waived and to participate in extracurricular activity. And in Connecticut, we've specifically passed a law to ensure that students who are on their own and are considered unaccompanied homeless youth have access to their own education records. And in every single school district is a homeless liaison or a McKinney-Vento liaison to assist students. And at the end of my slides is a link to be able to access the McKinney-Vento liaison. But where are the gaps? Well, there's lots of gaps. For one, in Connecticut, we have a gap in services for minors who have no place to stay, a lack of crisis beds for minors. And we have a lot of good laws on the books, but many students and families don't know about them. So while I've gone over them at a high level here, I would encourage attendees to either go to the SchoolHouse Connection website or the National Center for Homeless Education to get a more in-depth reading of many of these rights. And there's some fantastic webinars. So if you could do the next slide, then I'll close out with really the importance of centering young people with lived expertise of homelessness to find the solutions. Though, you know, we work off of the premise that those closest to the problem know best what the solutions might be. And so in Connecticut, we've been fortunate to be able to work with the Youth Action Hub, which is at the Public Health Institute, and they are a participatory action research program of young people with lived expertise of homelessness. And they have really helped to drive the solutions to youth homelessness in Connecticut and connection, how we can get to a place of safe and affordable housing for young people. And in one quick example is that they have developed an online drop-in center for young people to connect with each other for housing resources, support, and other resources in the community. So the next two slides, if you could, this is a brochure that is available on CCA's website. We have a teen-friendly website, speakupteens.org. And also accessible from the Center for Children's Advocacy's main website, and free and downloadable for young people, talking about many of the rights that they have if they are experiencing homelessness. And the next slide has some either statewide and national resources that you can link to. So I'm happy to answer any questions, and I will pass it on to Dr. Omari.
Great.
All right. Thank you so much. So thank you for having me. So I'm kind of the education piece. So I work for East Hartford Adult Education. I'm the program facilitator, and I'm also an ESL teacher. So here's kind of where this kind of meets everything. So everything that affects our adult students is really a two-generational thing, right? Because many of our students are parents of students in the K through 12 world. So I'm going to talk about what I hear from students and issues that happen for the adults, but also remember that these adults, many of them have children in the school system. So it could be lots of things. Affordable housing is so important because a lot of times if you can't afford a house, you end up in your car, which happens. We've had students living out of their cars. We've had students who have decided that, you know what, I'm really young, and this older guy really, I'm his girlfriend because I need a place to sleep, at night. And when he gets mad at me, he locks me out, and I don't have access to my food, my toothbrush, my clothes. So I come to class the next day and I wash up in the bathroom, right? Because at least I'm trying to get to class, or maybe I can't get to class, right? So there's this relationship issue that happens on maybe I could find someone different who is nicer to me, but I can't because this is the roof over my head. A lot of these stories come from students mostly on the GED side, right? Which ties back to Barbara's slides, who talked about, one of the largest risk factors is the lack of a high school diploma for homelessness. And we see it. ESL students also have issues slightly different. For them, I think when they come to the United States, they have support systems in place. What ends up happening is, oh, I need to miss class because I need to work, because I need to pay my rent. So that happens a lot. I've also heard of like landlords that kind of take advantage, where I've had students go, my plumbing doesn't work, but I don't know who to complain to. I complain to the landlord and he's not fixing it. right? So there's lots of different issues that happen, but housing is so important for stability, right? Which we all know, but it also, these students are trying to advance themselves. They're trying to go back and get that high school diploma. They're trying to learn language and culture to try to improve their lives and the lives of their families. And without having the stability of having a home, a stable home, it puts a lot of barriers in place where they can't advance because they can't come to classes. They drop out of classes. They're just missing so much, all because they're either trying to make ends meet, working Uber if they have a car. Many of our students don't have cars. Transportation is a whole other issue. But it becomes very difficult for our students to improve the lives of their students. And I like to also put out there, refugees are also having another issue that I'm sure other students have as well. They come with the support of other organizations to set them up in housing, which is like temporary assistance. And then they no longer receive that temporary assistance. They do not have enough language, culture knowledge. They don't know where to turn for help. And even when people help, like to try to get Section 8 housing, those wait lists are incredibly long. And with everything kind of going on, the supports start to run out, and it's a whole another slew of issues because they will not be able to remain in their home. And that's been happening to a lot of our refugee students. So that's kind of all I've got. If anyone has any questions or anything, I'm happy to answer.
Great. I will bring all of our presenters back into the conversation. Folks, please feel free to drop your questions in the chat. We love dialoguing with you. And I think we've got a small enough crowd that if folks would like to come off mute and ask their questions, we can make that happen too.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Absolutely.
Yes. Hi. Thank you to all the presenters today. The information is really beneficial. I'd like to ask, I work for Journey Home. My name's Eva, and my job within the agency is the career development coordinator. So I assist folks from the ages of 18 and up to find and identify training courses, employment, for assisting them with eliminating as many barriers as I can when it comes to employment. So transportation, clothing, resume assistance, things of that nature. And I was just wondering, the GED has come up multiple times where we have young parents who never obtained their high school diploma or GED. And so I'm working diligently to have relationships with community partners so I can assist young folks in obtaining their GEDs and making the process as smooth as possible. So I was just curious, like what's a potential way of building stronger relationships with frontline workers and school systems? Or is there something in place, especially in the Hartford area? Because a lot of parents that are in shelters with their kids, the kids are going to school. So would it be that the shelter case manager has a relationship with the teacher in the school that the child goes to? What are some maybe thoughts and ideas of how to start those relationships? Because I know also a lot of parents do not want the school to know that they're in a shelter. So I was just curious about navigating that. Thank you.
Well, I'll say on the adult ed side is I would hope that the shelters are aware of where the adult education programs are. Because if we knew, like we would be able to connect as what's great is for high school diploma, there's like 3 different pathways to get it. Most common is GED, so that's what we always refer to it as. But in East Hartford, we call it just high school completion because we will have conversations with you once you test on kind of which is going to be the fastest and most efficient way to do it, because it's not always the GED. Building relationships is definitely one of the the hardest struggles, because it's someone might say, go to the superintendent. Well, the superintendent is super busy. And by the time it trickles down, it's lost. It's like playing the old game of like telephone. Everything gets lost, right? So it's kind of, the caseworker at the shelters really should have contacts with adult ed. And I would say maybe with the principals of different schools, or even like one elementary school, one middle school, one high school in each town, so that it's a little bit of a closer match. Like even if it's not that elementary school that the student is going to go to, there's already a relationship there. So now that principal can tap onto the correct principal, like to the correct school for that student. Ideally, it would be to have relationships with all of the principals. And a lot of the schools, I know for East Hartford, I'm not sure for every town, but we have family, believe they call them, it's family liaisons. I forget that they change their names every so often, right? But there's someone in each school that their job is to make connections with the families in that school to help provide those different supports and resources, or even if it's just to have a connection so that the parents have someone to go back to. We can't afford uniforms. Oh, don't worry, we have, used uniforms, like, whatever it may be, we have an extra supply. Food, here's the food pantries nearby. So for adult ed, I know like we have bulletin boards with all of this information, but as far as with the homeless shelters, I would hope that somebody could make a connection with the principals around, which is still a big ask.
Thank you so much. And yes, I'm new to this position. I've been with Journey Home for a little over 3 months, and prior to that, I worked in Bristol in homeless services for about 3 years. And I know we had a relationship with the homeless school liaison in Bristol, and a lot of times that becomes an issue is there's only one contact, right? And everybody's overburdened. Everybody has a caseload that's impossible. That's why community is so important, right? And to have multiple avenues to be able to obtain goals. I'm curious, is there a monthly, quarterly meeting where homeless service providers are meeting with folks in the school system? I'm curious about that. And if not, maybe that's a potential idea since it's so important, right? The connection between schools and homeless services.
I think
So,
that's a great idea. Is there one? There's not one that I'm aware of.
yeah. So, Eva, I'm really glad that you're asking these questions because I think it all comes down to brass tacks, right? Who are the people that I can contact? And I would add to Dr. Omari's comments that, of course, as you mentioned, the McKinney-Vento liaison, but when you're looking at a district, some of these big urban districts, as you mentioned, there's so many schools. And I think one of the things that we find really helpful in our office is to talk to the McKinney-Vento liaison about who their particular contacts are in each school, because usually the liaisons are for the whole district and they might have particular people that they've tapped in different schools. So I think that makes a lot of sense. And then in the Hartford area, we do have, to your question, we do have a statewide group of folks, including the State Department of Education, who get together to talk about children and youth experiencing homelessness. But in the Hartford area, there previously was a group of folks getting together on a monthly basis in a more regional capacity. And I'm not sure that group is still meeting. So I think that could be some discussion for future, pulling that back together to have folks being able to share more local resources. We do have a group of people meeting specifically about minors experiencing homelessness on their own in Hartford. The Hartford Youth Service Bureau hosts this case conferencing where we have providers from all over the city come together and in a de-identified way We have, we talk about any referrals that have come in, and what that young person has identified that they need. And we talk about who around the table can provide those resources. And we really pulled that together in order to have some level of connection for minors because of the lack of crisis housing and crisis supports that we have in Connecticut for minors who are on their own. So I hope that's helpful to your thinking too.
It is. Thank you, everybody.
Any other questions from our audience today? While we wait, Stacey, you had mentioned the resource hub for young adults in Connecticut. How might folks be able to access that? Is that accessible to the public?
Yeah, you're talking about the virtual drop-in center? Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
I'm glad you asked about that because what I could do is provide the most recent flyer to you, Danielle, which you could distribute to folks who are here. And that is the brainchild of the Youth Action Hub. It was born out of young people talking about wanting a way to connect with other young people, particularly came out during the pandemic. And also, again, due to Connecticut's both transportation challenges and lack of drop-in spaces, physical drop-in spaces in crisis centers. And so the Youth Action Hub developed this virtual space where young people can get together on Discord, and it's a space that's monitored for safety and resources are shared. Our agency is available for private consults on legal issues. Other agencies around the state are also available. So I'd be happy to get that flyer and share it with you so you could share it out more widely.
That would be super helpful. And Barbara, I want to bring you back into the conversation. You had briefly mentioned the data profiles that you all have on your website, and I just wanted to give you the chance to speak about that a little bit more and how folks can utilize that resource and what some of the data there is.
Thanks very much. So this is data from the 22-23 school year. It's federal data, but the states get the data from school districts, and so it's aggregated. We were able to work with the University of Michigan Poverty Solutions so that you can really drill down into it by community. So certainly by county and by school district, but also by congressional district and by state legislative district. So it's very helpful for advocacy purposes because policymakers, it's all local. So when you can show this is how many students were identified as experiencing homelessness, this is where they were staying when they were first identified, graduation rates. Also, there's a tab there that helps look at under-identification. Homelessness is hidden. It takes a lot of proactive work by schools and communities to make sure that students are properly identified so they can benefit from the rights and protections. So there's also a way you can dive in and look at the poverty rates compared to homeless by school district and see which districts are likely under-identifying. The only caveat I'll say is because the national data is lagging the state data, so the number you cited at the top for Connecticut is more recent. And as soon as we get updated federal data, we'll update the profiles, but it can still be very useful and a really good conversation starter. And the last thing I'll say is we also have information on 0 to 3 and 0 to 6. So for those who are working, that is not as local, it's more state, but just to say we don't want to overlook our littlest ones as well.
Thank you. I'll give it another minute for folks to jump in with questions. Otherwise, we can maybe wrap up a little early today. I do want to mention just a few things while we have some extra time here, that while we at the partnership are focused on affordable housing advocacy, obviously we're thinking holistically about the work that we do, and some areas in our advocacy that I think naturally intersect with the education conversations we've been having today. And even more expansively, we're talking a lot about the rental assistance program. So both the state and the federal levels rental assistance funding is one way to put money into folks' hands directly, keep them more stably housed, avoid evictions, provide that resource and support for folks who are living on a fixed or limited budget. And another area that we've been active in is around just cause eviction protections. So making sure that families aren't evicted unduly or unreasonably, making sure that we're keeping folks housed. We're avoiding the, I've heard the phrase used, the scarlet E for evictions is once that's on your record, it's really hard to find housing opportunities, or folks are more, landlords and homeowners are more resistant to bring folks in who have an eviction on their record. So avoiding that entirely by making sure that the reason folks are evicted is limited to a reasonable cause is something we're also advocating for. And a slightly tangential piece to this is within the courtroom. So if an eviction does take place, making sure that there is legal representation. A lot of times we see families who are struggling to afford their, their daily budgets. So when they are asked to enter the courtroom, the ability to afford a lawyer can be another layer, another daunting element to that process. So making sure that there are resources for that legal support for families who may find themselves in that situation. So that's just a little bit from our lens. I wanted to make sure we spent some time more on the education side, but when we're thinking about the housing piece, those are some of the things that we're thinking about and working on actively here in the state. I did say I wouldn't mention the conference anymore, but within all of your presentations, you had mentioned a little bit about some of the HUD program and some of the federal funding concerns and changes at the federal level. I just wanted to make folks aware that at our Affordable Housing Conference in November, we'll be speaking with housing and homelessness advocates at the national level a little bit further to talk about some of the impacts to HUD's programs and some of the federal protections from their perspective, more in depth in the housing sphere. So if that's something that you're interested in diving into the learning of a little bit further, hearing where the current landscape is, we'll be having that conversation Tuesday morning of the conference. Awesome. And one more plug for our presenters to share their contact information in the chat, and just a round of applause. Thank you so much for being here with us today, for sharing your expertise, your experiences, your perspectives. Really grateful for your time and just generally all the work that you're doing. I know this is a really crazy time we find ourselves in, so appreciate you making the space for this conversation and finding opportunities to collaborate. And thank you everyone for attending. We'll share out the recording. All of the resources that were shared today will be available alongside the presentation slides. We hope to see you in November, and thanks so much for being here with us. Have a wonderful rest of your Fridays.